Good morning, everyone. This is Father Nate, missionary priest in Italy. Today is October 31st of 2025, and we're celebrating Friday of the 30th week in Ordinary Time. Today's Gospel comes to us from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 14, verses 1 through 6. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. In front of him there was a man suffering from dropsy. Jesus spoke to the scholars of the law and Pharisees in reply, asking, "Is it lawful to cure on the Sabbath or not?" But they kept silent. So he took the man, and after he had healed him, dismissed him. Then he said to them, "Who among you, if your son or your ox falls in a cistern, would not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day?" But they were unable to answer his question. In today's Gospel, Luke presents us with yet another scene involving Jesus and the Pharisees, this time a Sabbath meal where Jesus heals a sick man. There are two things that call our attention. First, we have the example of Jesus. Christ went to dine, meaning it was his choice to go to the Pharisees' house. No one forced him. Surely he was invited, but as we've seen over the past few weeks, the Pharisees were no friends of Jesus. He would have known their intentions, but he seems to ignore them. Their dishonesty and their evil motives don't prevent Jesus from going to meet the Pharisees where they are at, both in terms of a physical location and also in terms of their moral attitudes. Secondly, we can contrast this generous, charitable attitude with the action of the Pharisees, who are clearly just looking to trap Jesus, right? The Greek word that Luke uses to describe what the Pharisees are doing, paratereo, can mean both to keep a close eye on, but also to scrupulously observe in practice. In other words, the general meaning is to observe closely. That can be in the sense of vision, like you're keeping an eye on something, or in the sense of legal observance of the law. We could say that it's the close legal observance of the Pharisees that blinds them and prevents them from seeing what Jesus is actually doing. Their close eye on Christ is tainted or marred, we could say, by their legalistic version of life. Likewise, when the Pharisees are unable to answer, Luke also uses a very strong Greek word, which means unable to contradict or unable to dispute. In other words, the Pharisees wanted an argument. They were spoiling for a fight. But as they realized, against the weapon of charity, there's no defense. Now, there's two things that we can take away from all this. First, from Jesus' example of dining with the Pharisees, we see how, in the words of St. Therese of Lisieux, true charity consists in bearing all our neighbor's defects, not being surprised at their weaknesses, but edified at their smallest virtues. Of course, Jesus knew the Pharisees were up to no good, but he nevertheless accepted their invitation to come and dine with them. He was edified by that small act of kindness and set aside all the dubious motives of the Pharisees. That's because their souls were worth saving. They were worth putting up with their obnoxiousness. As Chesterton put it, the Bible tells us to love our neighbors and also to love our enemies, probably because generally they are the same people. We don't get to pick our neighbors, but we can decide whether or not to deal with them. We can ask ourselves, do we embrace those opportunities to really practice charity, especially with members of our community? Secondly, from the Pharisees, we see the dangers of attachment to anything that isn't God. In fact, when we look closely, we see the Pharisees really didn't care about the law either. No? Had they really wanted to defend the law, they would have at least attempted an answer to Jesus' questions. Instead, they just wanted to find fault. And so they missed an opportunity to understand the law, and more importantly, to understand God's love, which displays itself in such a marvelous way on the Sabbath. As St. Mother Teresa of Calcutta would say, if you judge people, you have no time to love them. We can ask ourselves, are we attached to our own judgments of others? Are we attached to our own way of seeing them? So today, let's ask for the grace, through the intercession of Mary, Mother of Charity, to truly love our neighbors out of love for Christ.
If you found this video fruitful, please feel free to share it with a friend or family member. Or if you would like to learn more about our missionary priests throughout the world and how to support them, please visit iveamerica.org. Thank you for watching, and God bless.